idea what that is. Amazing. Wow. Oh yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Kim Reed. I am the chair of the Duke Women's Forum in Washington, D.C., and extend a welcome to all of the new faces that I see. I think we have several 2012 grads, and I can't believe that you guys were born in the 90s, weren't you? That's. I need to take a breath after that.
Thank you.
We have a really fantastic panel tonight. I want to give a few announcements before we get to the panel, but I want to move things along because some of our panel, as you might expect, have other places to go back to tonight. It's been a little bit of a busy day for folks who work in the executive branch, so I'm going to try to wrap everything up by about 8:30. Before we get started, let me just announce a couple of upcoming events. On July 11th, we have another of our Career Advisory Network dinners. This one is on media and journalism. And we're going to have 4 very accomplished Duke women working in various fields in media and journalism, including a producer from 60 Minutes, a new media blogger and journalist, an on-air reporter for one of the news channels, and a print reporter as well with Politico magazine. So I think we've got a really great lineup, and if that's something that you're curious about, these Career Network dinners are very informal occasions at which we just talk about how to get into a career, what the career is like, how to balance your life when you're working in that career, how much flexibility does it allow for having other things in your life. That will be, again, July 11th at 6 o'clock, I think. 6 o'clock, yeah. And that will take place at the new Duke offices. For those of you who aren't aware, Duke just opened offices at the corner of 12th and New York. They are fabulous and have some really nice conference space. So we're going to do a BYOD dinner, and just bring your own dinner, and we'll have a good time there. Our other event that is scheduled right now is September 15th. We're going to do another volunteer community event. We'll be at Martha's Table on Saturday from 10 to 1. That is September the 15th. We're going to be undertaking various duties from chopping vegetables and preparing food for the attendants at Martha's Table to watching the kids while their parents have job training and other skills trainings. So it should be a lot of fun. We had a really good time last time and felt really great about what we were doing. So hopefully you can wear a Duke t-shirt or some kind of Duke paraphernalia and show our pride while we're there helping at Martha's Table. One last announcement. On August 1st, the Duke Gen group, which is the entrepreneurial network, not just Fuqua people, but a lot of other Duke undergrads, Duke law people, people from all across the university, getting together for happy hours and networking events. And I've been to several of these. They're really terrific opportunities to get to know people from a wide span of years at Duke. So don't think that if you're a class of 1985, you're too old to go to one of these, because you won't be. Or if you're class of 2012, you have too little experience to go. There are people from all different years, all different backgrounds. And it's a really neat organization. So again, that is also at the Duke office, August 1st, starting at 5:30. With those preliminaries out of the way, you have on your chairs the biographies of our fabulous panelists. And because reading their biographies would take up a good chunk of our time, I'm going to let each of you read those at your convenience and just move on to the program. We have 4 amazing ladies with us tonight, and I'm really pleased that they were able to take the time to come and be with us on a really momentous day for several of them, both in their work lives and in the hours that they're going to be working for the next few days or months. We have, I'm not going to be able to do this Yes, I will. Okay. Amanda Anderson is on my far right, and Amanda is presently Senior White House Legislative Affairs Advisor. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you recently got a promotion.
Right. Well, it's Special Assistant to the President for Legislation. It's the same thing, basically.
Sounds much better.
It's a title.
Okay. And next to Amanda is Marta Urquia, class of 93. Until extremely recently, she was the Senior Policy Advisor to the White House Domestic Policy Council's Office of Social Innovation and Civic Partnership. And I'll let her tell you about the new job that she undertook about 3 weeks ago. Next to her is Danielle Gray, who is Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy Policy Advisor to, let me start over. I'm getting everybody mixed up because I've got it in a different order. Danielle is the Deputy Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, and she'll be telling us more about her specialties and what kind of issues she covers at the White House. And next to her is Tanya Robinson, class of 92, Special Assistant to the President for Justice and Regulatory Policy. So I'm going to start out by asking each of you, just in a couple of minutes, to describe your current duties and responsibilities. You know, these are incredibly impressive titles. What do they mean? Tell us what it is that you're doing from maybe a high-level perspective, and then we can dig into the weeds a little more as we go along. I'm going to ask a few questions, but if anybody has questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. I will give you a microphone because we are taping this, and we want to be able to hear your questions on the DVD. So, Tanya, can I ask you?
Like the mic,
sure.
Whatever they have in front of them sounded like it worked.
Yeah?
When she talks, she sounded like she's on a mic.
They're here.
Hello.
I know that they're on the mic, but you guys aren't.
Okay.
So I'm going to pass this around if you guys have questions. So, Tanya, can you get us started?
I can, and I should begin with a caveat on behalf of the panel, especially if we're being taped, that we're all here in our individual capacities as Duke alums, kind of wanting to share our personal stories. We're not here representing the White House. We're not here speaking our capacity as White House or government employees. It's really kind of sharing our career paths here, which I think all of us are delighted to do. I hope, is that sufficiently robust? That covers it? Okay. There are, as you may know, several, or at least a handful of policy components within the White House. I am affiliated with the Domestic Policy Council. Within the Domestic Policy Council, there are several subject matter or content units. The one that I oversee is Justice and Regulatory Policy, which includes a fairly broad swath of issues. It is, loosely speaking, policy issues that relate to the Department of Justice, but as I'll describe, there are several issues that cross other departments, and so it's not necessarily defined by the policy issues that may arise at the Justice Department. And then the other part of my portfolio is regulatory policy, which means that I am the kind of designated person to help our leadership team interface with OMB and OIRA around moving regs kind of through the process. And the idea is that I will at some point be of real assistance to the rest of DPC as well as we think about what our regulatory priorities will be. On the justice side, the portfolio really ranges from, for example, criminal justice issues on one hand, kind of a broad set of civil rights related issues, including equal pay, which has been a big issue for us recently, firearms, really, if you can imagine, really the broad kind of swath of questions that might arise in the justice space, that would fall in my portfolio. Because it's relatively broad, it intersects with a good number of our other portfolios in the Domestic Policy Council. For example, we have a unit that's focused primarily on urban affairs and economic development or economic opportunity issues. We share a good many issues with that team, as does NEC, as Danielle will likely say in a moment. We do offender reentry issues, kind of prison-related issues, and are standing up an initiative around kind of that set of priorities. And in that space, we are, in fact, sharing some space with our health team, which kind of led our big victory today, thinking about the continuum of care and treatment for ex-offenders who are released from prison. So it's a very broad swath of issues, which for me is both the beauty of the portfolio, but also the burden. I have a colleague who focuses just on immigration questions, for example, or we have a good number of people who focus primarily on education issues. Our little team has the challenge of thinking slightly more broadly, and so always have this tension between our ability to dig deep, but also kind of cover the waterfront in some ways too, and I'm happy to talk more about that.
Yeah, I'll just to piggyback on Tanya's remarks. As Kim said, I'm one of the deputy directors of the National Economic Council, and basically what that means is we work for, my boss is the head of the National Economic Council, which focuses on economic policy making in our administration. And the way I tend to describe my job is we have three deputies. One focuses a lot on financial markets. Another focuses a lot on fiscal issues, so like tax and budget policy. I like to say I'm the people deputy. I focus on human capital issues, so labor policy, training, higher education, social service programs like unemployment insurance, and a lot of our anti-poverty stuff that we do jointly with the Domestic Policy Council tends to fall into my portfolio. And I think the way I like to describe what those of us who work on the policy councils do is that our jobs are sort of threefold. One, we try to help the president make decisions on what positions he wants to take, whether it's on legislation or new proposals that he's going to make. And you could imagine in a very big government, any given issue, there's likely going to be 50 different sides of it. So, does the president want to support a gas tax? So the Treasury Department will think about that in one way. They'll think about revenue. The EPA will think about it in terms of environmental consequences. The Labor Department will think about labor impacts of certain positions in certain regions of the country. And I think the job of those of us who work in the policy councils often are to basically convene meetings where we basically sit around a big table with a lot of people and we try to get the policy right. We try to figure out what's the right answer. We are uniquely situated because we keep in mind the president's priorities and his preferences, and we can keep a sort of bird's eye view. We can think about politics and we can think about communications. How will it sound if you take a certain position? So we kind of keep a global view while we sit around a table with a lot of smart people who have competing views, and we try to play a fair broker role in teeing up decisions to help the president make decisions about what he wants to do. So that's a third of the job. Another third of the job is implementing things that we've done. And so for any given piece of legislation that gets implemented, it's 5,000 times harder, I like to say, trying to figure out how to govern under it. And so a lot of our work every day is working with agencies trying to implement things. I spend a lot of my time, for instance, because I work on labor issues, working with the Department of Labor on implementing a set of reforms that the president passed as part of the payroll tax deal around unemployment insurance. And so the sort of non-glamorous but every day, how do you get these programs up and running, that kind of work is a big part of our jobs. And then the final part, I think that those of us who work on the policy councils, the final third, I think, of our work tends to fall into basically helping our colleagues in the White House. We not only staff the president, we staff our colleagues. And so I'm on the phone all the time with Amanda about veterans' jobs issues because, some legislation will be moving in the Hill, and Amanda and I will be figuring out, what position we want to take on this, what's happening with certain testimony, that kind of thing. My colleagues who work in press and communications will often call us because some reporter's writing a story and they want our help in getting the reporter to understand what we're doing and to get it right. So a big chunk of our job is not just working for the president, but really working with and for our other colleagues in different parts of the White House. So that's my summary.
I keep building on Tanya and Danielle's overviews. I, as of 3 weeks ago, was in the Domestic Policy Council with Tanya and also worked very closely with Danielle and her team in the National Economic Council. The office that I was a part of was the Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation, and it was newly created with this administration. And I was fortunate to be a part of the team on the presidential transition team after the election that began the process of defining this and figuring out how it would evolve. So an incredible experience to see that made the day-to-day very different from what some of our colleagues were working on. A lot of people say, what's social innovation? And really what we were trying to get at was, how do we think about the ways in which government can be a catalyst for effective solutions in communities, and that we've seen a lot, I would say, over the last couple of decades in particular around social entrepreneurship and around this idea of, being really results focused in terms of trying to solve local problems in communities. And, you hear about people all the time that are launching new ventures, whether they're in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit or in some kind of hybrid form. And the thinking was that, some of these principles of social entrepreneurship or social innovation could be well applied in government, and that if we could think about how we are more deliberate in how we direct federal resources, especially in a time like what we've been living in these past few years of extremely limited public resources with a growing demand for services and solutions. And so how could we do that? And how could we direct federal resources to be about investing in what works and using evidence-based policies and practices to advance solutions that could be scaled to reach more people? So we did a lot of work across, similar to Tanya, our work was cross-cutting. It's not issue-specific. It's about sort of lending expertise to our colleagues to help think about, what are some different ways to come at this problem, and what are potentially some public-private partnerships that we could bring to bear in driving not only more capital, but more effective solutions into communities. And the president has been very big on the public-private partnership, and what we've been wanting to show is the ways in which some limited federal investment can really attract more capital from private or non-federal sources at scale, and there's a lot you can do with that. We were also focused on the civic side, the civic participation, citizen engagement, national service is a big part of our portfolio. The agency, the Corporation for National and Community Service, which runs AmeriCorps and many programs that you might have heard of, Senior Corps, Vista, et cetera. But, how can this also be an engine to support transformation of communities? And again, really with a focus on social impact. We've cut across a lot of different areas. We look at innovative financing tools. There's, as I was leaving, one of the efforts I had focused on was Pay for Success, which was this idea of, how do you leverage government, public resources, private capital, and, these effective community solutions to really be focused on results and come together in partnership to finance and reward results. The way most federal funding works and most public funding is you pay forward and you want some kind of prescriptive implementation for workforce development or for substance abuse prevention or preventing recidivism. But this is sort of built on the idea we'll pay you when we see the results, and attracting private investors to say, make an initial investment and set benchmarks and goals. Tools like that we were testing out, things that we were seeing happen around the world, and bringing those back into conversation with the agencies. A lot of interagency convening. As Danielle said, there's incredible experts in the agencies, but they do all have competing priorities. And when you can lift up the conversation and take it, in Danielle's words, from that global perspective, it really shifts things. So a lot of what we were trying to do was how can we work smarter? How can we be more effective? What are the opportunities that can be leveraged? And it was a lot of working not only within the policy councils, but also with our partners in the agencies, as well as the Office of Management and Budget, and an incredible experience. But I think that pretty much captures what we were working on.
I work in the Office of Legislative Affairs at the White House. We serve sort of as a liaison between the White House and the Hill. We're sort of broken down within the office with a Senate team and a House team, so I focus on the House, where I cover 3 committees, the Agriculture Committee, House Agriculture, House Veterans Affairs, and House Small Business Committees. We also cover about 70 to 80 members of Congress each, loosely based off of those committees and whether or not they're members of the committees, but it's pretty loose at this point. the day-to-day in my job is completely different every day. Today I was on the Hill all day because we had a lot of big votes and activity happening. But I spend probably about, when they're in session, about half of any day up on the Hill, and half back at my desk at the White House approximately, which makes it really interesting. You're always doing something different. Meeting with members, hearing what interests they have at the White House or within the agencies that we can help accommodate them on, meeting with committees to talk through upcoming legislation, upcoming hearings, witnesses, things they want from us, things they probably don't want from us, and sort of going through that. We cover Democratic and Republican members, so I work very closely with both parties, closer with some than others probably, but I keep a good relationship as best I can with everyone. And I think like everyone else here, I think it is fascinating just to experience that while I'm a liaison to the Hill. I also have a lot of work that I do with agencies. Each agency has their own legislative affairs shop, so I'm constantly working with them. And also with internal policy councils at the White House, various other interests at the White House. So you feel pulled in a ton of directions all at once, but it keeps it interesting. I cover those three committees. At the same time, I also do a lot with women's issues, policy issues within the White House. So there's a lot of variety in the day, and I think, members may serve on a committee, but they have interests that range far, far outside of those committees often. So you are always picking up the phone, trying to remember what you're just working on, and then switch to talking about environmental education. No, it's Veterans Jobs Corps. No, it's, you name it. So it keeps you on your toes, which has been fun.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. Very impressive. I want to go back with each of you to the time that you were at Duke, or I think you all went to Duke undergrad. When you were at Duke, did you see yourself ending up in federal government? And how many of your decisions about jobs to take, classes to take, did you make based upon a desire to eventually work in government someday? Versus I had no idea I was going to work in government. It just kind of turned out this way. Amanda, let's start with you.
Well, I was a public policy major, so I think there's always some assumption that you may end up in this kind of field when you're a public policy major. That said, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. I graduated with no job and no clue, and I was very interested in campaigns. I'd done electoral work before, and when I graduated, it was during the Kerry campaign. So I figured if I'm kind of interested in this and I don't know what I'm doing, I may as well give it a shot and see what I think, and kind of fell in love with it and sort of did campaign route for the first several years of my career and then moved into government. So I think it was sort of just stumbling into that. But there are courses and experiences at Duke that definitely, I don't know that they necessarily train you for these jobs, but they inform the work that you do and sort of help prepare you. I think just for me, the most important thing was a broad variety of experiences, a broad variety of classes, a broad variety of internships. I mean, a lot of that experience for me, at least, was about narrowing down what I didn't want to do, because it's not always so clear when you're 19 what you want to go do, but it sometimes is clear the things that you're not so interested in doing. So I found that to be probably one of the more helpful parts of Duke, was just you have so many opportunities there to see and do.
What did you do for your internship for public policy?
Well, I'm trying to remember which one was specific for the internship. I did a bunch. My family is local here, so I would move up here and do various ones. I worked at a nonprofit in the city that encourages literacy rates. I worked at the National Organization for Women's Legal Defense Fund doing work with immigrant visas, which is actually very interesting now that this has all kind of come back around with the VAWA debates on the Hill. So all kinds of things like that, which, again, they were all fascinating. And now I'm here, and I'm not sure I can draw a direct line, but I think it all informs it.
Danielle, how about you?
Very similar. I think like many Duke undergrads, I started off in some kind of pre-med, why am I taking chemistry kind of situation for a little bit. I'm laughing because some of my friends and classmates are in the back and they remember that period of life. But I ultimately became a public policy and econ major, double major. And so I think, when I'm class of 2000, so there was a presidential election my freshman year. My, I guess sophomore year, I think there was a major midterm elections, and there was a Senate race in North Carolina that was pretty active. And so I certainly felt like during my time at Duke, I had lots of sort of awareness of Washington, D.C. I remember taking I don't know if it was like a study group or a working group. It didn't really feel like a class, but I did something with Congressman Price in a group of students, and if any of you work for him, that is with the utmost respect and admiration. But it was
I did work for him, by the way.
You did. So, but I'm saying that because I don't remember. It didn't feel like a class. It more felt like a bunch sitting around a table and talking and thinking about stuff. It was really great. And so I think I certainly had an interest that whatever I decided to do with my career, law or other things, would end up doing something that sounded in public service. But other than whatever notions of that you have at that age, I'm not sure beyond that.
Marta, how about you?
Yeah, we were chatting about this briefly before. The most indirect route, I think, and yet at some level, I think, direct. I was not born in this country. I'm from El Salvador. At the time that I was at Duke, I was not a citizen. It hadn't really registered for me that my family was not going to go back ever permanently. And so that evolution probably took a while, and I was in my late 20s when I finally was like, hey, I think I should become a citizen. And there was some stuff happening politically, kind of backlash against immigrants with some potential threats to permanent legal residence. And I thought, I've been working and paying taxes since I was of working age, and it would be a real shame to lose that. And so when I was at Duke, I started out thinking I would study political science or international business. I had no clue. And then I came to DC probably my second summer because my sister was living here, and I thought I'd come spend the summer in DC. We were living in Connecticut at the time. And I worked in a think tank doing research, and simultaneous to that, I was doing research on children and looking at examples of the good society, and could you find examples of the good society in sort of modern day poverties of affluence or communities of affluence and poverty. And then simultaneous to that internship, I was at the Latin American Youth Center, which is a nonprofit here in DC, where they had offered me a job. I had offered to volunteer, and they said, well, why don't we hire you? And I was teaching creative writing to a group of young people between the ages of 13 and 19, 1 year younger than me at the time. And it just completely changed my world. And it made me think a lot about myself and my experience and my family, and that we were very fortunate to get out of El Salvador at a time when we could take a plane and leave and come to this country, and that my parents had had education, and and just sort of what did I want to do and what did I want to be about, and just I wanted to do good. And I think, the notions of how you can do good now are very different than what they were then. It was very you can go work in nonprofits, you can, in the ways that I was thinking about it. And I just kind of followed my heart and ended up deciding, at Duke, I need to have good learning experiences. I need to have professors that I feel connected to. I need to feel like I'm a person and not a number in some massive class. And so I went with the things I cared about, which were literature and visual arts, which one doesn't often go to Duke for. I think I was one of the first graduates in the film and video program, the literature and film and video program at Duke. But then I also had this interest, this wonky interest in me around public education and around public policy. And so I did a lot of coursework in that. And I was doing every service activity you could think of. I spent more time out of class and more time out of my dorm for my last 3 years, 2.5 years at Duke, than I probably spent in my classes. And so getting here was never a goal, and it was never something I was actively pursuing. And it had never occurred to me to work on campaigns, probably because I was I'm not a citizen, I can't really be involved in this. But when the last presidential campaign happened, that was a moment where I felt wow, if there was ever a campaign that I would have wanted to work on, it would have been this one. I was pregnant at the time with my first child, and so I just was a grassroots volunteer. And when election happened, it was I really wish I could have done it because, maybe I would have wanted this experience. And I literally was sitting there and I said, how does someone like me get to be a part of this? There's something really amazing happening in our country right now. And literally, like the next day, I got a phone call, and I was invited to be on the transition team. And naively, I thought I was going to do 3 months of public service for leave of absence from my job, and I would go back to my life, and that would be it. And 3.5 years later, there I was at the White House. So it's been quite a trip.
Well, Tanya, you were Duke Student Government President, so I'm guessing you had some inkling that you might want to go into public service.
Beyond Duke Student Government, which is kind of the end all for me. I did. I thought that I would be kind of working either in the public sector or in the public interest in some way, which is somewhat ironic because I ended up spending about half of my career in the private sector instead. I came to D.C. right after graduation. I should say one thing maybe, because I think, Marta, while you did not have a public policy degree, took a good number of courses in OChem as well.
Yes.
I was also OChem for the newer grads is where the public policy department used to be housed. And I was a public policy graduate too, and that's kind of a thing, econ, political science. I was a public policy grad before there was the fancy Sanford Institute. But my first job, school, forgive me, you're right, Ann, school.
When did you graduate?
In 92, and my first job out of Duke was for Terry Sanford. And that was the path that I somewhat seen for myself, kind of working in government, working on the Hill. Took some time off before going back to law school, and after law school, worked for the government for a year and made my way into the private sector, and since then have kind of gone in and out. So yeah, I never envisioned being at the White House, but assumed that I would be working in the public interest in some way, and had a bit of a tension kind of for a part of my career as you know, one looked for ways to do good work from the private perch, which is not so difficult for those of you who are working in the private sector, and we can talk about that too.
Can you expand on that?
I can. So until February, I was working at a law firm, Wilmer Hale, where Susan is now, and had started there immediately after my clerkship following law school, but left about 2 or 3 years into the experience to go to the Hill, but then came back. And at least for me, Wilmer was the right place. It was one was able to do kind of a fairly good appetite, at least then, of pro bono work. And the reason I went to the firm in the first place, because that, talk about things that were not a part of your plan, that was not a part of my plan. It's not why I went to law school. But I had heard in my third year about a partner at the firm who had taken on what was then kind of the set of civil rights cases. And the notion that one could do that sort of work in a large white shoe law firm in Washington was completely foreign to my experience. But John Payton was there. He was kind of leading the effort on the Michigan affirmative action cases, and I had assumed until that moment that I would be a civil rights lawyer someplace, either in the government or at an impact litigation organization. So this notion that you could be in a large law firm, you could have this sort of practice, and at the time it was at least half of his practice, but also go to a place where people were kind of working in the public interest was absolutely foreign, but intriguing enough where I ended up changing my summer plans after my third year. So as opposed to taking the bar, I went and summered at Wilmer Hale. I split my summer between that and the Institute of Government, which is a kind of public policy-like program at UNC, and worked for John and worked for others during that summer, and that led me back to Wilmer eventually, which was helpful in part because I was also struggling with this notion of, you know, how do you do good work but also pay your bills? And my family at the time in North Carolina was experiencing some financial trouble, so it became an easier decision for me, the notion that I could kind of go to Wilmer and find this community of folks who were public interest refugees. I mean, there were a lot of folks at Wilmer at the time who, like me, had assumed they were going to be kind of in the public sector, and were working really hard to try to integrate that into our, you know, quote unquote corporate practices. So, you know, law practice has changed a bit, but I think still, I mean, the idea is that there are folks who, you know, want to do good work, who think that at least in my area of practice, the law is designed to kind of do good in the world, and so figuring out how to do that even alongside or in the context of your corporate representation became a very important thing for me and for the folks with whom I was working.
I think we have all heard the stories. I worked at the White House during Clinton 1, and I know you guys worked much harder than I ever did. We hear the stories about you guys burning the midnight oil every night, being there on holidays and Sundays. And can you talk a little bit about how you are able to manage to achieve some sense of balance in your life? And by that, I'm including not just family and children, but also when do you find time for friends and hobbies and alone time? How have you gone about trying to do that in your lives? And Amanda, I'm going to start with you because I think you're the most recent grad, aren't you?
Yes, and I also somehow managed to get married while working at the White House, so it can happen. Like the wedding planning and working at that time for Rahm Emanuel, who's the chief of staff of the White House, was not the easiest period of my life. But I will say, you guys, Danielle's at least been there basically since the beginning, and I think I don't know that I can speak for her, but it has eased somewhat, I think, in terms of the schedule. The first year of an administration was probably the most exhausting thing I've been through, besides maybe transition, which was honestly one of the most exhausting things I have been through. But, the first year is really rough, but you find a way to make it work, and I think, it's something as simple as this morning. I knew that we've had a very long week in legislative affairs, obviously, due to today's news and votes, but also we had our White House congressional picnic last night, which is when all of the Hill comes to the White House to eat barbecue and drink beers on the South Lawn, and, we all have a big mingling, and so that plus everything today was very stressful. So I got up early this morning and I went to Pilates, and it was the most sane part of my day, and it was very centering, and then, you dive in, and then you kind of come back out of that, and you go and get a glass of wine with a friend, and you talk it over, and so those things happen much earlier and much later than I probably would like them to, but I find that those are the sort of things that keep me energized in my job and in my life, and remind me that all the stresses and the tensions and the ups and downs of the day-to-day at work are separate from my personal life, and to try to keep those as separate as you can, I think, is incredibly important. And being able to sort of find a balance and do that has helped keep me sane. I think it took some time to figure that out, especially early on when it was very hectic. But you also learn. There are times when you may feel an absolute pressure and a need to be there, but there are priorities, and in any job there are priorities, and I think that you can sometimes just say, no, I can't do that, and it's not easy, and you have your BlackBerry always with you, but you can go home and do it from there if you need to. We also have had a lot of changes in this administration that I think have helped with that a lot. I mean, we are the first administration to actually have laptops. We started and it was all desktops still in the White House. So I think this was a big push of the First Lady's, honestly, and all the staff now have laptops. We have secure logons, so you can actually bring it home and do it from there. And that alone, has made a huge change. That said, I say all of this with, fully acknowledging that I don't have children. And I think that probably makes the balance a little easier. I don't know that there's like 9 o'clock glasses of wine with friends when you have kids, but that has been my experience, at least.
What does your husband do?
He works in the Senate side, so we met on campaigns, and so I think that also helps in a way, because he also works a very, very crazy schedule, and so we can both put up with it. We decided to move in together because we were dating when we started the month of inauguration, which was, again, a terrible idea in terms of timing, because packing boxes while we're also starting up a government was not ideal. But we stayed together through that, which I think shows a lot of strength. And we wouldn't have seen each other otherwise. And so I think that alone even, really helped. But, things like the wedding was hard to plan through all of it. This was right around the time that Rahm had said he was leaving. We were having a new chief of staff come in. It was very chaotic, but I still took a 2-week honeymoon and put away the BlackBerry. And so there are ways to balance it somewhat.
I remember when Amanda took her 2-week honeymoon while working for Rahm Emanuel, and it was like an impressive thing. I thought it was
the fact that Rahm's head didn't explode.
I worked for him for 5 years.
She came back. She still had a job.
We had a rapport. It was fine. He knew not to mess with the honeymoon either. I was like, no, this is my time.
Okay, Marta, can you talk about balance in your life?
Yeah, it was very stretched then. I just say what it was. I went into this with my daughter. She was just under a year, so 10 and a half months. I was still nursing at transition, which I quickly discovered you could not pump because you shared an office with like 10 people and you were, working till 2, 3, whatever. But it was, I went into this knowing this wasn't forever. I went into it knowing this was, this is a moment in time. It was really important to me. I was doing something that I really, truly believed in, wanting to support an agenda that I firmly believed in. And it was not my decision alone. I literally had, conversations with my family, being my husband, my siblings, and my parents, to make the decision at every juncture. So when I got the call about transition, I called everyone. It was not my decision alone to make, because it was going to be a financial sacrifice. It was going to be a sacrifice in terms of time, but it was something that I needed to know we were all going to be in it together, because without them, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And the same is true of our friends. We have an incredible community here in DC that is like family. And to know from them that we could call on them. My husband's, this is just how insane it all is. My husband's in law school. I was doing an evening program, and he's not yet done, and we both started at the same time. Looking back on it, I think, wow, we were really insane. But I think we were just really living out what we believed. And I think for my children, it will just never be the same for them. What the experience that they will get from this, my daughter especially. So it was really important to do it. It was really something where I knew that I was making choices. And so not going out in the evenings, it's not like something was taken away from me, because there was so much else I was getting in exchange. And those are things that as a mom, you decide to do. You don't go to receptions all the time. You don't do the dinners. You put in the work where you put in the work, and, you make your choices. But I do think that, my social world shrank very much, and that's just a truth of, my young children, 4.5, 18 months now. So then I got pregnant, had another baby in the middle of all of this. And so, while I was at the White House. And so, it just kind of, I'm laughing now, just sort of, I haven't processed. I have not digested like what I've done these past 3.5 years, and I'm just, we just did it. We just pulled through. And I think at the end, my reasons for stepping away were that my daughter's getting older, and my bandwidth is, it can only be what it can be when you're working those hours and that kind of mental intensity, and you have children that, you want to be responsive to. And I just made a decision that, I wanted to be there more for her, and I wanted my husband to just be able to go full force in his last year of law school and whatever he wants to do, and not have it be a trade-off. Who's on tonight, right? Like, who's the priority? So it was a personal choice, but it was one where I felt really good about the opportunity I'd had and the body of work. But you need people who will support you in your life. You need people that will remind you that it's important to take time out. People who are just going to take care of you and be good to you, because it's not easy. No job is easy. No job is easy when you're a mom. No job's easy when you're trying to juggle so many priorities. And so, I think the day that we left, that I left the White House, the first thing for me was just to give a big thanks to this huge, massive community that stood by us to make this possible, because I'm just so grateful to them for that experience. And, I don't want to glamorize it. I know the whole sort of meta conversation that's happening right now around having it all. It was what I wanted. It's not about all. It's what did I want, and what did we want to do as a family. And I'm grateful. My daughter, my last day, we had our departure photo with the president, and she has this photo that went viral with him
in the West Wing now.
No, it's not. Oh my God. It just went viral that she made a drawing for him, and he signed it, and then like next thing you know, it's like up on the White House website. It's like all over the place. And this little girl, 4.5-year-old, her dad's African American, I'm Latina, and and she's just like, yeah, I know President Obama. Like, I met him, and, and it's like, I've been to the West Wing. I've been to, I'm like, I literally, to the day I left, thought I was going to get tackled when I'd walk in the West Wing with my blue badge. Like, I never really believed I had permission to be there. Like, it's just, and I'm not joking when I say that. Like, I never fully, like, settled into that. And here's this little girl, and she's like, yeah, whatever, president, and that's great. And I would take all the 3.5 years and sleepless nights for that.
Danielle?
I don't have too much to add. I guess I'll say one thing is, when you look at people who've worked in the executive branch, a lot of time you'll see these sort of like 2-year windows on their tenure in any given job, and I think that's sort of indicative of like, you're kind of making a decision to sort of give your all to this sort of great opportunity to serve, and then people get tired. And I had a lot of appreciation for that. I started out with the president's campaign in early 2007, and so between 2007 and 2010, my life kind of just felt like a blur. And somewhere around towards the end of 2010, I actually sort of felt like I was hitting a wall. So I started out working in the administration in the counsel's office, and I do not think that I had anything approaching sort of a good amount of balance in my life at the time. In part, I think, as Amanda alluded to, the first year of a new administration, I mean, you're trying to get everything done. We had the president's entire, my job in the counsel's office was essentially, I was the lawyer to the policy council. So my two main clients were the National Economic Council and the Domestic Policy Council, and they were very, very busy in 2009. And that was only half my job. The other half of my job was working on judicial nominations, and we had like a bunch of judges to appoint to the courts, and we had a Supreme Court nomination and confirmation process to go through during the summer. So, and that was like just like year one, and like we did the same thing in 2010, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, 2009 to 2010, the level of activity in the Obama administration, I mean, it really did feel like it was like unprecedented, like so much was going on. And so sometime around the fall of 2010, I just got tired. Like I'd been doing this since, the spring of 2007. I think that a lot of the, I think when you're a young woman, and you find yourself in a position where like, you're sent to go talk to Larry Summers and go explain to him why he can't do something. That's like, you want to do your homework, right? You want to spend a little bit extra time with the cases and talking to the people at DOJ or whoever you might have to talk to find out why he can't do the thing he wants to do and just make sure of it. And that takes a lot of time and, and that happens. And I think that I got really tired and I thought, I could use sort of slowing down a little bit. I could use a sort of less intense job for a while. And so I actually made a decision the end of 2010 to go to the Justice Department. It wasn't sort of in hindsight, it wasn't really the smartest decision because I went to go work for the head of the civil division. And at the time they were like suing BP, defending healthcare, like every major thing that one could imagine. So it wasn't the most considered decision, but it was certainly a huge change in pace from life in a White House. And so I think I say all that just to say that I quickly understood why when you look at people's resumes who like work in the executive branch, you often see these like 2-year stints. And I think that's a big part of trying to find the balance, which is you kind of go full speed for a little bit and then you decide, there are other things that you'd rather be doing. I would say that the last thing that I would say is that I think coming back to my job now, I'm like much smarter, I think, about my own personal time. So like, I like work out with a trainer twice a week, and it is like so clear to people that they are not allowed to interrupt my time. And I've structured this in a way that the president's trainer works out with a lot of the White House staff. And I've told like my boss that like I will tell the trainer if I have to cancel on him to like tell the president like when he works out next month. The president's very into like a fit staff and stuff, and so it's like this threat that hangs out there. And like I've just gotten a little wiser. So like I make just like Amanda was saying, she makes time for Pilates. Like I make time for myself. I'm like tonight when I was trying to come over here, there was all kinds of wow you have to stay. No, like you just have to like walk out the door. And I think a little bit of that comes with like a little bit of comfort level, and I've been around long enough that I doubt that they're going to fire me for anything, and like I'm a little more confident in myself, frankly, and I think with that comes a little bit of restoration of the balance.
Well, you definitely held the line. I mean, the number of times that Danielle announced to everyone at the start of a meeting, I will be leaving at X time, so
To watch
I can go see the Duke game.
I was like, not
She was literally like,
we had the room for an hour, but I will leave in 50 minutes.
or hang up on the call, right? You're like, Danielle.
I've changed.
Priorities are straight. Yeah, I like that. Tanya, you're still kind of new to this.
I am, and don't have that measure of confidence, by the way.
But you come from a
Grammatically.
big law firm where
I
it was
do.
not exactly easy hours.
Yeah, no, it's true.
How are you managing? And how's your daughter managing?
To the first question, how am I managing in terms of work-life balance? Not well at all. And Kira's doing brilliantly. But I have, again, it's this could not be a better or a more informed contrast. And it may be partly my newness, and I'm still, I'm surmounting a fairly steep learning curve, so that may be a part of it. But I, for the most part, have zero balance in my life. I've been carrying around Anne Marie Slaughter's article for 2 days now, and have just not found a moment to actually read it. I know, very ironic. So again, I don't know to what extent I should attribute that to the newness, or I mean, who knows what it is. That could be a part of it. I finally cut and pasted into an email, which is about 26 pages. But I haven't even gotten past paragraph 1. So, but it's interesting because I did come out. I was a partner at a large law firm. I had very long hours then. But the difference for me is that I also had a good amount of discretion over my own schedule, and so. There was a period where we lost our caregiver and didn't have anyone to pick my daughter up from school, but fortunately her school was about 20 minutes from where I worked, where our offices were, and so I could leave my office around 2:30 to go and pick her up, and it was challenging and it was hard, but I could do it, could get there, pick her up, and Kira and I would hang out for a couple of hours, sometimes shortly a little bit less, could drop her off maybe at the emergency daycare at our office, and then my husband would come and get her from our office and take her home. And we had to do this for about a month while we were trying to figure out how to kind of close that gap. And it was stressful, it was hard, we complained. I could never do that at the White House. So I now have zero discretion over my schedule and feel as if I'm running from meeting to meeting and then have more deliberative time kind of after hours. So I'm looking to get to where Danielle is, because I am not there, at all.
3.5 years.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get where you are. It's lovely to in 3.5 years be from it. Yeah. So it's been very challenging. I have a 4-year-old. We got started a little late, and so trying to strike the right balance has been difficult. And it's not aided by the fact I had taken a short leave in order to work on the transition team, but there were opportunities then, and my husband and I kind of decided that both of us couldn't go into the administration. He is also a political appointee, and we knew that our little household would not be able to kind of take this, and I think our intuition was right, but when we made this decision, it was for a whole host of other reasons, and we both kind of went in eyes wide open. So it feels like a blessing, even though it is really, a challenge as well.
Can each of you talk about the role of mentors, particularly other women, in your life? And I don't mean to exclude men as mentors by any means, but one of the purposes of the Duke Women's Forum is to encourage women to make cross-generational connections and to help each other in our careers, our personal lives, our interests. So I'm curious if any of you can identify a particular mentor in your life, and how you have worked with other women throughout your career.
Yeah, I'm happy to. When we were talking to the work life, I mentioned that, part of, I think, what was going on with me is just, it's a new job. I think I'm young, although you all with these class of 2012 things is really throwing me off a little. But I came to the White House, and I am 30 years old, and I'm an associate counsel to the president, and I am surrounded by older people, brilliant people, and a lot of my job is telling people no and opining on what they can and can't do and how they should do things. And I think what was hugely impactful for me is that two women in particular, the woman who used to be the head of the Domestic Policy Council until recently, but Melody Barnes, and Nancy Ann DeParle, who's currently our chief of staff and a big Duke fan and strong Duke ties. But both women basically had a lot of faith in me, and so they were really empowering in terms of like, you know, Danielle's our lawyer, and were very inclusive and helped support me and helped make sure that, you know, a lot of these jobs that we all have is like, are you in the room? And that's a big part of, you know, are you allowed to sit at the table? That kind of thing. And they were hugely impactful, I think, for me in that. And so those are certainly, I think, two that come to mind. I've had a lot of mentors, you know, in my career who have been men as well.
Anyone else?
I've been very fortunate with mentors since I was at Duke, and a lot of professors that, you know, some I'm still close to today, and one that I'm godmother to her son. And, you know, it just, so at Duke, it was a really great place for me to connect to older women who could be a support to me and give guidance. I think that, you know, I'm a big believer in it. I'm a big believer in the idea that, you know, there's something to be learned from other people. I think the idea of women to women mentoring, as much I've also had male mentors, and but I think for women it's especially important. You know, I think that the kind of just like internal navigation, or just the very subtle things, like Melody Barnes, my goodness, the most incredible woman. That was like the hidden surprise for me of coming to the White House. And it was nowhere on my radar. And I was like, oh, this gem, this treasure, this incredible person who is smart and capable, but cares and is, you know, just so just wonderfully fair and conscientious. It was really amazing to watch her work, and the same with Nancy Ann DeParle, and in these very high-powered environments, and remain, you know, for the most part, in this very steady way, and to never lose sight of anyone who was in the room. You know, it becomes, you know, it's a very like stratified hierarchical place. So it takes intentionality to notice everybody and be inclusive of everyone, and it's not lost on us when that happens. And it gives you that added boost of confidence when you're trying to navigate something where just generationally there may be big gaps or years of experience, and you're trying to assert yourself. You know, so huge. And I give big thanks to Melody for being that guide. You know, so many times I would sit at my desk, and even after she left, I'd be like, well, what would Melody do? You know, and just kind of, that would be how I would kind of guide myself through making some decisions, and, you know, in a place I was still kind of learning how to navigate. Sonal Shah, who was the first director of our office and also went to Duke in public policy, was incredible, really incredible. And from transition, she chaired the team that I was a part of, and I didn't know her before. And I remember her pulling me aside one day in the bathroom. We were having this conversation. She's like, well, when you work in government, I was like, she's crazy. Like, what is she talking about, going to work in government? But she was always like forcing me to think ahead. The day I showed up at the White House, she's like, what is it you want to do next? I was like, are you crazy? Like, I just got here. And she's like, no. You need to start now thinking about where you want to be next, because it's a process. So definitely, you know, very grateful to being able to work.
And can I add one thing, just because I forgot to say this, but, you know, one thing I think that I've learned is that, you know, you shouldn't be afraid to sort of ask people who've suggested that they're happy to be helpful to you. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a number of really great mentors when I was in law school who were just former professors who I just kind of took seriously, that they actually meant it when they sort of said, you can kind of call on me. And they, you know, I first started working for Barack Obama when he was running for Senate, and I had never had a job in politics. You know, I had no real relevant experience. I was sort of young, 25-year-old at the time. And the reason I got my job with Barack Obama is because I basically had these professors like phone bank him, you know. So I reached out to like 3 different professors, 2 of them who were women who I knew him at different points in their lives. At this point, this is before he became like a huge star, but he was still a pretty prominent rising Senate candidate. And I just sort of, I had graduated the year before. These people said that they would be helpful if I ever needed anything. I just sort of stepped out on faith that they would actually be helpful. And so I reached out to them. And I think that's like an important lesson. I see like even interns come through our office, the White House intern program, and they're so afraid to ask us, would you ever do a letter of recommendation for me, or, you'd be surprised at like how much I think people are into helping you. So I think one thing I think people should definitely think about is not being shy about, using resources that you might not even think you have.
Anybody else have any comment on that?
I would just add, I think from working in the West Wing the first couple of years, that is in any administration, I would imagine, a fairly male-dominated kind of space. And we were lucky enough to have very, very strong senior women on the staff. And Melody is a great example of that. But there were Nancy Ann, Carol Brown, or you name it. There were so many great role models. And I was an assistant to the chief of staff, so I would sit there and I would watch these fights that started in the chief of staff's office happen directly in front of my desk immediately after. And they were just so strong and respectful and wonderful. And I think Danielle's point is really good, because after about a year and a half in that job, I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I was considering leaving the White House. And every single one of those women I asked, and they sat down with me. They took me to lunch. They had coffee with me. They had me over to their apartments for a glass of wine. We talked through all kinds of options. They got my resume out. I didn't end up leaving because I had another opportunity, but they were so incredibly helpful. And these are women that have so much going on, and they have so many people looking to them for help, but they were absolutely willing. And that group of women at the White House had a very close knit. They had dinners together all the time, and it was this great example. So the younger women who were assistants in the West Wing all started doing happy hours together, because we were like, look, if these women can pull it together, and they have kids, they have husbands, they have other things going on, speaking engagements, and we can do the same thing. And so we started doing our own sort of networking happy hours. I wouldn't even call them networking. These were family, basically, at this point. We spent so much time together. But they set such a nice example of sort of a way to do it, and to sort of be strong women there, but still have this great bond and be supportive. And I think for me, before this, because a lot of my career was in the campaign world and then sort of on the Hill, I didn't have as many female mentors. I probably had more male mentors leading up into that. So it was a really refreshing, I think, experience to find these groups of women that were just really great and helpful.
I think I just add two quick points. One, and I think this may be obvious, but I came up until shockingly recently feeling as if mentoring was a great thing, really important, but almost optional. And I think it really is essential. And the places where I've stumbled, and there have been a few places, it was always when I didn't have the right sort of mentoring relationship in place. And then the other piece of it is really also valuing peer-to-peer mentoring. I was at a law firm that I thought was great, but really didn't have that many women of color. And a huge part of my support system actually existed kind of across my peer community in some ways. And so wouldn't want folks to think that the most or the only valuable mentoring relationship is one that you have with a senior person. Like, I got immense value from my relationships with other folks and viewed those relationships as mentoring relationships too.
And that happens too with people that you know from college and graduate school. And one of the great things that I have found is that those people that I've just naturally kept in touch with because we were friends, they're the ones who turn out to be, the new general counsel of Procter & Gamble, or the special assistant to the president, or, something like that. And the fact that we have been friends all this time, it means that I can trust what they say, and they can trust that I'm genuine in speaking to them. So staying in touch with people, and that doesn't mean having lunch with them every week, just touching base now and then, letting them know what you're doing, hearing what they're doing, asking a few questions. It really helps me tremendously. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you've kept in touch with people, and that has furthered your career through the networking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, one of the more interesting things that I'm starting to see as someone who's been out, a good number of years, is that my friends that are doing sort of similar career things, and working in public service, and are now starting to contemplate things like running for office and stuff. And I find it like a weird thing that they want to come talk to someone like me just because I worked for a presidential campaign, as if I might have insights on what a state Board of Education campaign or something like that might look like. But I think one of the things that I'm sort of starting to observe more is that the peer-to-peer, as Tanya alluded to, is increasingly important. I think as people are at different stages, and I think about, just myself, I'm sure that when I'm ready to leave the government and I start thinking about, what's out there in the world, the thing I'm going to want to do is to reach out to all of my friends who are doing things that are far afield from what I've been doing, and to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I know we have some women in the audience who are undergoing career changes right now, and keeping in touch with those folks who've maybe gone into a different career than you have at the time you're making a transition can be really helpful. We're going to open it up to questions now. I have plenty more questions, but I'd like to let you guys in on it too. So anybody have a question they want to ask?
Hi, I'm Victoria Bright. I work on the Hill currently, so I can relate to the blackberries, having it right there. But I work in a leadership office, and what I've noticed with seeing people come and go in the office is that it's really about it's not that this is a sole factor, but your network is so important to being able to take your career to that next level and to move into different offices. And I kind of wanted to ask you ladies, how important was your network in getting you where you are today?
I mean, I think it was critical, only because I didn't have a planned out path. I would never have guessed that this is where I was going to end up. It was always because I was having coffee with my now boss, the Director of Legislative Affairs, to talk to him about a different career opportunity that had popped up, and I was just asking his advice, and he said, well, you could just come work for me. And I didn't even know that was an option, And so I'd worked for people on the Hill that then moved to the administration. I mean, I think the key point I would make, though, is that especially in D.C., the word network it rubs me the wrong way. And I think the way you're using it is very different, but as a verb, to network. I just don't, to the younger folks, the newer folks here, it's not about going to the reception on the Hill and having a glass of wine and handing out your business card a lot. I mean, it's about building actual relationships. And I think that you can find real good ones here in DC and solid ones. And those are the ones that are going to help you. So when you're younger and you're newer in your career, if you're on the Hill, wherever you are, work really hard, ask for more, even if it's painful work, do it pleasantly, and just be a pleasant, hardworking, smart person. And people respond to that better than they do, I think, the verb of networking, just kind of schmoozing, which doesn't really, I don't think, hasn't helped me in my career, and I don't really have a whole lot of interest in it. I think the kind of stuff that you're talking about is really important, though.
And you don't get, somebody that's going to take a flyer on you and make a phone call, to help you land a position on a presidential campaign when you don't have that real relationship. And it's so transparent when you see folks who are just it's purely transactional what they're doing. And I feel the same way. I don't want to even be responsive to some of those requests, because we'll get those kinds of, it's very just a very shallow kind of connection. And I think, what I've appreciated, as folks have described, is the value of relationships, that you just formed relationships genuinely without an end goal in sight. And, I think about the ones that brought me into the administration that were relationships that spanned, over a decade. I always kind of bristled at the idea of schmoozing, and I never did it. And I always thought, oh, wow, this is going to come to hurt me. And lo and behold, just being me and doing my work and being real in my relationships with people is what was valuable in the end.
Another question?
I was just wondering, particularly working in the executive branch, how do you manage ideological disconnects that you might have with your office or the administration? Particularly when, like Marta, you in particular seem to be very ideologically driven in your decision to join the administration, but conversely, how do you manage any reservations that you might have?
Reservations?
I think that,
Means you're not moving fast enough, or you would do something a different way.
I think that I went into government, eyes wide open, and, I was definitely following a very strong set of beliefs and a passion and a, sense of conviction in an individual leader. But certainly, it's when you see the sausage making up close, I just now know that, I even question some of my own judgments in the past, or some kind of assumptions that I myself would have formed as a liberal or as a progressive. The recent announcement around the exemption from deportation for the Dreamers, for example. I mean, that was just one thing where, had I never been in government, I wouldn't have understood the nuances of what it took to get there. And, and I understand it seems monolithic from the outside, but this is very complex. It's very layered. So I think that, so there's that. I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned from being a part of this administration and watching this president and this president as a candidate was the value of playing the long game, and just really kind of having a sense of confidence in that, and having patience with that. But there's a higher sort of good or something that you're oriented to, and it's not perfect.
Anybody else want to talk? Tanya?
Well, I think that none of us here is a principal. We work for the president, and I think that I don't want to speak for the full panel, but I suspect that all of us kind of come to this job with some perspective and a view about particular issues, but at least I view my job as trying to help us get to the right policy outcome, and to appropriately tee up options for the president. But at the end of the day, if someone chooses a decision, if the president decides to go, in direction A, and I think that direction B is the more appropriate direction for whatever reasons, I think that we are all team players, and we handle that kind of within the House, and we resolve differences. We wrestle with tough questions, but once the decision is made, at least from my perspective, everyone needs to get on board.
Well, you're of service. I mean, it's really what it means to be of service. And the day you walk in, you surrender your I statements in many ways. Mm-hmm. You don't write a document, that the kinds of things, you don't write legislation from an I perspective.
And we have to take it, and then, as everyone does with groups or everything, I mean, we take it and pitch it to members. And so part of my job is to actually go and sell this thing that maybe I don't 100% agree with, but I think I actually am probably in line with this administration on most things, so it probably isn't so common. But even if there's a little something, that's my job. I'm there to serve decisions that other people, have made, and it's been usually thoroughly litigated within the building already. It's not like some choice that just gets made out of the blue. So I think knowing that confidently, a lot of very, very, very smart people have already taken a look at this and decided, helps.
Hi, I'm Ann. I graduated a year ago, and I'm working on the Hill currently. And I was hoping you all could just speak to both your decision to attend graduate school, if you did, and the timing of it, and then how that is currently helping you or not in your current positions.
So I went straight through, and I think I decided pretty early on, probably. When I was in college, that I wanted to go to law school. And so it was a pretty straightforward thing for me. I think it certainly has been helpful to me. I think I used to have this talking point until the new replacement for Melody Barnes went to the Domestic Policy Council, because she's not a lawyer, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But for a while, the heads of the Domestic Policy Council, National Economic Council, and the National Security Council were all lawyers by training, and I think that was also the same in the Bush administration. And I think that there's a big chunk of our jobs, because we're trying to be largely honest brokers and teeing up decision making and asking a lot of questions and figuring out, not just what's the right policy, but sort of, are there any limits? Will it have consequences down the line? Like, there's much of the sort of art, to the extent there is one, of sort of thinking like a lawyer. I find that it has relevance to my current job.
I took some time off. I went to law school, but then took 3 years off between college and law school, and that was the right decision for me. It was a time when the vast majority of my class had gone straight through, but there was a critical mass of us, and it's become more so, I think, now, who took some time off between the college experience and the law school experience. The decision to go to law school wasn't, again, it was the right move, but I don't know that it was especially informed. I mean, in my mind, people who did good in the world were lawyers, which I get is a very narrow view of the world. But that was all of my heroes were kind of civil rights lawyers. I mean, if what you wanted to do was to go out and be a champion, you went to law school. And that's really what drove me in that direction. I'm embarrassed to admit that it really was not a much more sophisticated decision than that.
Marta, did you go straight through?
I didn't go to grad school.
Can you talk about that?
I could never identify what I would go to grad school for. And so
That's a smart reason on your bank account. That's really smart.
and it didn't feel like, I didn't want to just bide my time. And trust me, I took GREs. I went through all the sort of, should I, and there was a time when I kind of had a panic moment about it and was like, oh my God, what did I do or not do? But if anything, these last few years have just sort of just reassured me that, I did just fine and I'll be fine.
So grad school is not a necessity.
Marta, what is an Echoing Green Fellow?
Echoing Green is a foundation that I got a fellowship in 1995. And it's a public service fellowship, and they are what are called angel investors. So it's kind of taking the venture capital model and applying it to social ventures, and this idea of investing in individuals with good ideas, bold ideas of social change. And where I was when as an undergrad, I was exposed to this and had seen this and this idea that if I ever had an idea of how I might want to do something, here's a potential way to get some support. And I was lucky to be able to apply and have that fellowship for 3 years. And Cheryl Dorsey, who's actually the president of Echoing Green, is this incredible woman who, I encourage you all to get to know. But I would say she's been one of my mentors and supporters, and has been also very supportive of this agenda. But it's a great community, I think, of people around the world, both from the U.S. and other countries, that basically are trying to come at some real macro problems and bring some solutions to bear on, how to, whether it's dealing with poverty or dealing with health issues or dealing with civil rights issues around the world. But it's a really inspiring community of folks.
I was wondering, I'm in graduate school now, and I'm interning in an office in D.C., and most of my office is male, but my boss, about 20 levels above me, is a woman, and she's offered to serve, to answer any questions I have, and she says her door is always open, but like I'm sure all of you, she's incredibly busy. And I was just wondering, sort of from a practical level, how to go about approaching her and sort of taking her up on that offer, and what's an appropriate degree of outreach.
Does she have an assistant?
She does have.
So I think the easiest thing, and I know, I think our interns tend to do this with us in the White House, is to email her assistant, sort of say, she's offered to be helpful. Is there 15 minutes that I could either come by, to see her or grab coffee with her, however she'd like to do it. And I think that's probably the easiest way to go forward. That way you don't have to email her and worry about, she probably has 1,000 emails and maybe we'll miss it.
And just a quick follow-up, do you think that changes at all if she's my boss, effectively?
No.
Okay. Other question? Yeah, Julia.
I'm one of the older ladies in the room, and I'm a little bit of the fish out of water here, but my degrees from Duke are in physics and history, and I had the great fortune of being one of the mill aides in the White House back in Clinton. And my interest has always been on the impact of technology on all of the policies and where the country's going. And I guess, but coming from that technical background and military and intelligence background, it's like this, it seems like this hurdle. You can't get into the Hill or the White House unless you have that Hill experience. but the technical background doesn't, even for positions like technology advisor, the response you get is, well, but you're not a public policy person. You don't have Hill experience. What would your advice be as far as putting those two pieces together and really being able to contribute from that technical perspective?
So the interaction that I've had with those sort of worlds in the executive branch have been largely through OSTP in the White House, the Office of, for people who don't know, Office of Science and Technology Policy. We also have a chief information officer who's sort of like the chief IT person for the government. And a lot of people that I've interacted with in those worlds have like largely private sector backgrounds. And so I think some of them have done, I think about a few people that I can think of have done things like in the state government level. And I think that you're totally right. They sort of change how we think about policy from I remember, the OSTP folks talking about dashboards all the time and like how these could like change everything and shedding more sunlight on things. And I would be in these meetings and I'd be like, is that a website? Like dashboard, is that a website? But I think you're totally right about their impact. I think that one thing that I just generally tell people if they're having a hard time trying to sort of get into the White House, I think a lot of times what is a good step is to get into an agency somewhere, because I think that tends to be maybe a little easier to sort of navigate into, and because you end up working so much at the White House, it sort of gives you sort of stepping stone to build those relationships. But I don't have a lot of information and visibility, I think, into this world.
The transition team I served on was the open government, technology. What was it? Technology, innovation, and government reform. And it was the first time a transition team had ever had a technology-focused policy working group that was pretty massive. And, this was the one place where I think you didn't see that. You didn't see people had to have Hill background or they had to have whatever, but, it was more like a technology know-how that could be mashed up with policy making. And certainly would just echo what Danielle is saying about the agencies as being a point of entry. OSTP, I find that those guys are really accessible. I mean, they love to talk to people, and it's guys and women. I mean, this is just like they're very interactive, and I think that, it's sort of the cycling of people coming in and out, they're always wanting to talk to folks, and OSTP can bring in outside people to serve in that agency in a way that like the White House can't, but you still get to work on White House issues, and it's pretty neat what they can do, the flexibility that they have.
Can I actually help answer that question a little bit?
Okay.
So I'm currently a Science and Technology Policy Fellow through the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and it's a program that's been around for now 40 years, and it focuses on bringing PhDs or master's level engineers and scientists from academic industry backgrounds into the government, and we work all across the federal agencies. So I'm working at the National Science Foundation, but there are people working at the State Department, OSTP, all those sorts of things. But there are many different fellowship programs like that some do not require PhDs, they bachelors in science, whatever. And I would just encourage investigating those as well as ways to kind of get in and sort of explore.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christy. I went to Duke Law. I guess to kind of piggyback, I'm another one of the older ladies kind of in the room.
Welcome to the club.
I'm gladly joined, but just first, thank you all so much because this is very informative. And I just have maybe kind of like a reflection and then a kind of question. I remember when the president was first elected, this kind of seeing who were the people in the White House, the appointees. And maybe this is totally wrong. I felt, gosh, there's a lot of young people. So I was thinking, okay, has this vote passed me by at this point in my career? I guess my question is, if someone is kind of mid-career, what's the best way to kind of position yourself to be considered for such a job? What are some tactics or just some skill sets, some general advice you guys could give? And I think it's great to see a variety of ages on the panel. So I know my question's kind of broad, but any kind of tips or things would be very helpful.
Well, So one entree into an answer would be thinking about kind of how we got to our jobs. And at least for me, it was partly relationships and wanting to kind of put yourself in an environment where you're meeting people and building relationships with folks who are working in the space where you want to go. I think it's challenging to access the White House, period. And at least for me and the folks who I knew who were there before I got there, the folks who were working in fairly senior level posts in the agencies. I think all of them will tell this story about kind of having connected with someone who saw them do good work and that being kind of a departure point. So building relationships for sure, doing good work in those moments, I think, always applies, whether you're going to the White House or elsewhere. The mid-career piece of it need not be an impediment, and the panel perhaps is, or at least me, should be an example of that. The White House attracts folks who are at varying places in their careers, and I think folks view it as a temporary experience, and then you kind of leave that experience and go do something else or go do what you were doing before, and hopefully the experience and work before you got to the White House will remain relevant. So I'd say don't view it as an impediment. I think you can access government in many different ways. Accessing the White House for me is a slightly different issue. And I don't want to be, I think it's challenging. I just know a ton of folks who want to get a job there, and in the end, a lot of it, at least kind of in my universe, partly dependent on having worked for someone and them really having appreciated my work product and being willing to open up other opportunities for me.
And I think just broadening the question out a little bit, I know, when I was making a decision about what law firm to go to after my clerkships, I thought a lot about, and I think Tanya suggested something like this earlier, I thought a lot about wanting to go to a place that was filled with people who are doing things like I might want to do one day, or have done those things like I might want to do one day. So I spent a lot of time clicking through bios on my law firm website when I was deciding what firm to go to. And I ended up going to, I was living in New York at the time, I'm from New York, and I went to Skadden in New York, and a lot of people didn't understand why I went there. They were like, oh, you kind of want to be an appellate litigator, and they were more corporate and M&A, why do you want to go there? And I went there because I knew that I wanted to have a career that was kind of in and out of government. And I looked at a lot of the litigators there, and a good number of them had done that. They had, there were a number of them, the then governor before his problems was Eliot Spitzer, but he had a relationship with that firm, and so there were a number of people there who were very connected to the Spitzer administration. There were a number of them that had done stints in Mayor Bloomberg's administration. So I thought to myself, if I have to go to a law firm, I'm not going to be here forever. I should find a place that there's a bunch of people that are doing the revolving door thing in a way that I would want to do, just to put myself in that position. Because I think the advice I think that you all keep hearing from us is that sort of someone who's able to sort of see you and see you do good work up close and be able to be a really meaningful reference from you is that's what that is real networking, as opposed to the cocktail party networking that tends to matter in, I think, these careers. And so I think there's a big part of this, I think, as you think about these things, and this isn't directly responsive, but it's a broader point, that's putting yourself in a position to sort of make these kinds of inroads. And so I thought about that when I was deciding what law firm to go to. I think a lot of people go to certain law firms around town here because in terms of revolving door in government, that's the case. And my entry point into the administration was I worked in the campaign. That happens for a lot of people. I think one of the things that is striking about any White House, and I think this is one of the things that makes it hard for people to break into any White House, is, I was struck when I started that all of the sort of senior people, they had all known each other for 20 years, and they had worked together. They were all the young 30-somethings in the Clinton administration, and they had worked together, and they'd spent a lot of hours together, and they were all friends and socially the same. And that shouldn't really be that surprising, right? Because, I'm sure that, the Bush administration was filled with a lot of people who kind of cut their teeth in the Reagan and the Bush 1 administrations. And that just is that's just sort of a fact of these kinds of jobs, that they're going to be dominated by people who basically did these kinds of jobs last time around. Like, you're going to look for the best and most experienced in your party. Chances are it's probably someone who did something like that in the executive branch at the time, which makes it really harder for, I think, other people to break in. And I think so you'll have a sort of situation where the White House is like, one, dominated by people who have worked in previous administrations and have that experience. And then there's a number of people who sort of came up through the campaign and they have that experience. So then you're down to sort of this smaller window. And I think a lot of this smaller window is like someone had coffee with someone and they said, oh, or, you were an associate for me at the consulting firm and you were great. Why don't you come on and do that? And I think those jobs are harder to get in. It's harder to break into, but I think it elevates the importance of kind of putting yourself in the right position to sort of be noticed in that way.
I think we have time for one more question.
Danielle, you kind of started to talk about this, but I'm just interested in the difference between in the campaigns, like before he came in the first time and now, and like who within the, like how much do y'all even get involved in this campaign, or is that all the people working the White House now are, busy doing the work of the administration and there's a whole new set of people handling campaign stuff? I'm just interested in how that works.
Yeah, no, so for sure. So there's
other than West Wing, which is my
the West Wing is not instructive. Those people are all violating the law. There's this thing called the Hatch Act that does not seem to constrain them at all. So there's a complicated set of laws and regulations and opinions that have set pretty clear limits on the ability of people in the White House to do various kinds of political activity. There are exceptions, and people in certain positions are a little more free to do certain things in their off time, private time than others. But we are very, very careful about this. And so we are, the campaign is in Chicago for good reason. One, because I think it makes it easier to observe those very bright lines. And two, I think it's probably good for them. Like, as someone who worked on the campaign, I thought that, like, not being in Washington, D.C. and, like, the beautiful thing about being in Chicago the first time is, like, you'd go out for a drink and no one gives a damn. Like, no one. Like, they're doing their normal life. It's not the who's up, who's down. What did Al Kamen say that day? Like, people just don't think about that outside of Washington, D.C. So I think it's probably a good thing that they're all out in Chicago and they're focused on their job out there. So there is a small set of people who interact more closely. But I think for the rest of us especially, I mean, we're still just trying to just like do our jobs. Like, there's so many, so much of our jobs are responding to things on the Hill or incoming from, the White House the last few days has obviously been very focused on, what's been happening at the Supreme Court this week, and so we're in large parts of our jobs are reactive anyway, and so we're still very focused on that. Obviously, we have less and less of the president's time because he's traveling so much.
And people who want to go out on the campaign, there's a good chunk of people that have been White House staffers that have left, and so they actually quit their jobs at the White House and they go back to work on the campaign. So you would have heard about a whole bunch of those people, but so people can make a choice, but you can't do both.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I know you have really busy schedules, and today was quite a spectacularly busy day, so we very much appreciate your loyalty to Duke and for coming and giving us your wisdom. Thank you to everybody for coming, and I hope we'll see you at another Women's Forum event soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Are you going to make your party?